you feel overwhelmed by editing your raw photos, I'm going to share with you in this video my 3-step editing formula. Hi, I'm Rachel Koronek, professional food photographer, helping you take incredible photos that look good enough to eat. When I first started out as a food photographer, there is so much to know. And editing is also one of those things that can feel overwhelming because there is so many tools to choose from and so many ways to apply them to your photo. So I felt overwhelmed when I first started, so I really had to think about how was I going to simplify this and how was I going to make it work for my workflow. And I heard from the community over the years, they didn't know where to start or which tool to use next. So I came up with this 3-step editing formula to really help me understand which tool to use and when. So my 3-step formula is simply categorizing your edits and breaking them down into exposure edits, contrast edits, and color edits in that order. The reason I say to do it in that order is all of our edits are intertwined. So any exposure adjustments are going to affect contrast and color in our image. Any contrast adjustments are also going to affect color and exposure and so on. So I like to think about setting white balance first and then going ahead and correcting any of our tones, so exposure and contrast, and jumping into color last and looking at saturating, enhancing, or doing any color grading and color matching last. Let's put this into practice and edit a photo together using this 3-step formula. So I'm going to jump into Capture One. Now this is going to work with any editor you use. You can definitely apply this in Lightroom as well. So first of all, I'm just going to create a clone variant here so that we can edit this one from scratch. So the first thing I'll do is I'll always look at my histogram, think about how I shot this in camera, what is the concept, how bright or dark does the photo need to be, and how do I adjust exposure from there. So here are all our exposure tools to help us get the photo as bright or dark as we need for the story or concept we're going for without compromising details. The way that I love to build exposure with my images is I always love to put on a curve first. So let's just jump into our RGB curve here, and we're going to go and put on a simple S curve. So that's going to give us a little bit of contrast as well. Remember when I said the edits are intertwined? So we want to be checking our edits and coming back to those 3 categories. Now in Capture One, I am obsessed with the brightness slider, and the reason I love that is it targets the midtones. So I like my photos to have brighter midtones. So I'm going to use this tool to just increase that area. Now, a lot of the edits we do are going to affect other tones, colors, contrast in our image. So we always want to be looking and reassessing for those 3 categories. So it might be feeling a little bit bright on this side. So I'm going to just reduce maybe the highlights a little bit. Some of our tones there. And when that feels like it has a good base for exposure, I will move on to contrast. So here's a list of our contrast tools that we have accessible. So contrast is the difference between our light and dark tones. It's going to help us give depth and dimension to an image. So you can have high contrast in an image or low contrast. So neither are right or wrong, it just depends on the look that you're going for. So I did put a slight curve on before, so you always have access to a contrast slider as well, which we can go ahead and use. Otherwise, you can simply head into your curve tool and you might want to change it slightly, add a few more points and adjust to how you want the image to feel. Now this is going to adjust some of our exposure, so we might need to go back to our exposure edits and differ them slightly. So remember, we always want to be assessing and coming back to those 3 areas. So far, this is what our image looks like. So we've adjusted for exposure and contrast. Now, one of the other contrast tools I love to do often is the clarity tool. So in Capture One, there's a number of different methods for clarity that we have. I love to use punch for something that has a lot of texture. So we'll go ahead and see how adding a little bit of that is going to change the contrast in our image. Now we might just want to be a little bit more subtle. And then if it's feeling too contrasty, we can always go back into our contrast slider and just bring that down slightly. Even if you've been editing for over a decade, you're not going to jump into your raw editor and know this needs 10 points and that needs 5 points. It doesn't work that way. You have to use the individual tools and build them up as you go. So great photography is made up of a lot of little things done well, and editing is just the same. Before we move on to color, I always want to look at the image and I think about, is the exposure and contrast where I need it to be? And that can be globally and locally. So when we talk about locally, Is each area of the photo, does it have enough contrast and is it bright enough? Or if I'm looking for low contrast or a darker area, I would think about that as well. So this is where we might use something like a mask or a layer. It's going to jump into our layers panel here, and I might want to go ahead and just use a brush for the strawberries. So I'm going to go ahead and pop on my mask here. And I might want to go ahead and just add a little bit of a brush to some of these darker areas in the strawberries and possibly this part of the strawberry topping as well. So I'm going to go into my exposure and contrast adjustments here. I'm just going to play with maybe bringing the brightness out a little bit. It's a little bit there. And I might go ahead and just add a little bit of contrast through clarity to these areas. Once I'm done with my exposure and contrast edits, then I'll jump into finessing the color in the image. If your image needs a lot of color correction, I recommend doing that, or like setting the white balance and doing some of that at the beginning. But this photo I shot with flash, so it was very good in camera. So here are all the ways that we can edit color in our images, or even just enhancing color for the food or the story that you want to tell. So the first thing I would do is think about the hero color in this image, and that is the red. So I would think about, how are the red tones showing up? Is it reading red? Is it reading a little bit orange? I think when it comes to strawberries, I really want them to be a luscious red. So I'm going to jump into our color editor. Just in the basic section, I'll go ahead and target our reds. I feel like just a touch of saturation. It's already pretty saturated through some of the contrast edits that we did. I might darken them a little bit, and then I probably want them to read a little bit more red than orange. Just a few points can really make a difference. So let's just look at our reds here. That is just a very subtle adjustment, but taking them to be a little bit more of a luscious deep red than having a slight orange hue. The other thing that I might want to do here is we have some yellows, and I really want to make sure that my yellows are reading yellow, not green. We don't have any green in this image, so when it comes to greens, I like to go ahead and just desaturate them so that if there's any color cast, anything funky, when I don't have greens, I can go ahead and get rid of that. And I'm going to make sure that my yellows are just reading a little bit more yellow than green. When we're using contrast in our image, it is going to make our colors richer, or if you want low contrast, it could have the opposite effect. So when you're doing your contrast adjustments, it is going to affect your color. So sometimes you just need to make small adjustments when it comes to color if you have a high contrast image. So once I'm happy with the hero color, then I think about the warmth or the coolness of the image. What feeling do I want for that? So this is a breakfast scene. We have warm tones. So I feel like I want to make the image probably reading neutral, and then I'm going to add some color grading to have a specific feel. So I might just want to play around with making the image a little bit cooler. So I'm going to bring down the temperature slightly. And then I'm going to jump into color balance or our color grading panel. And let's just take a look at adding a color to the entire image. So we might want to, I'm going to saturate this so we can see what sort of color that we want to do. I want to stick away from the greens. I'm going to have something maybe a little bit more like a rich orange. And then I'm going to bring the saturation all the way down just to add a little bit of a warm feeling there. So let's just take a look. It's going to be a subtle adjustment. But it's just allowing us to have that feeling of like a warm, hot breakfast on a weekend. I think the warm colors really lend itself to the strawberries. So here is our before and after. Using the 3-step formula: exposure, color, contrast. Now, whenever you're thinking, I don't know which tool to use, I don't know my workflow, I don't know what to do next, always roll through those 3 categories. So how is the exposure looking? Do you need to make it darker or brighter? What about, is there a specific area that needs a mask that could be targeted to be brighter or darker? Then think about the contrast. How much pop do you want it to have? How much depth and dimension do you want this image to have? If it's a very soft image, maybe you want less contrast. If it's something light and fluffy. If it's a darker and moody scene, that lends itself well to having high contrast. And then lastly, think about your colors. Do they need to be saturated, desaturated? Do the hues need to be changed? And then how warm or cool do you want the image? And do you want any color grading to help tell a story? If you found this helpful and want to learn more, I have a bunch of editing videos on this channel. I also teach in-depth masterclasses on editing and retouching. You can find those at courses.toLoveStudio.com. If you have any questions on today's video, make sure to leave me a comment below, and thank you for watching. If you want to get better at